Bad science when it comes to transgender medicine. Bad science when it comes to climate change. The Trump administration has been fighting all of it. We'll get to all that in a moment. First, this is it. The biggest sale we do all year guaranteed. Daily Wire Plus is half off for a limited time. Get access to every show, movie, and the Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin. Head on over to dailywire.com/cyberweek. One of the big problems we have in the West, and this has been true for many years at this point, is the perversion of science. There's a fascinating piece out of the Free Press today by a columnist named Shapiro talking about gender doctors and what they say in private. Now remember, for fully a decade in the United States, there was a grand delusion that was promoted by nearly every member of the legacy media. It was promoted by every legacy media outlet. It was promoted by universities. It was promoted by Hollywood. And the basic idea was simple. A boy could be a girl could be a boy. There could be a female brain inside a male body, and vice versa. Sex was not, in fact, defined by biology. It was defined by the soul hovering inside you that might be differently sexed than your actual physical body. And this was treated as a fundamental, eternal truth by pretty much everybody in a position of authority. Why? Well, because the scientific community decided that they were going to back the insanity of the gender theorists. Well, now it turns out that virtually all of that was just based on absolute nonsense. According to the Free Press, at their conferences, closed to outsiders in the press, the gender clinicians allowed themselves to speak freely. They spoke about the boys who they say wanted to be girls, and the girls who felt they were meant to be boys, and the medical and surgical interventions that would make them appear as the opposite sex. The clinicians also discussed new procedures for a new type of patient, some of them adolescents, who wanted to be made to look as if they had no sex at all. In one of the videos, obtained exclusively by the Free Press, from the 2021 conference of the U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health, Amy Penkin, a social worker with the Transgender Health Program at the Oregon Health and Science University, spoke about one such case. Penkin told the audience about Sky, whom she described as an 18-year-old recent high school graduate who was living on his own for the first time. Penkin explained that Sky expressed a desire to look like a Barbie down there. Sky, said Penkin, reported being asexual, never having had sex, having no desire to have sex in the future. Indeed, Sky did not want to feel any pleasurable sensation and hoped removal of all erogenous tissue would be possible, according to Penkin. Now, historically, that person would have been given psychological counseling because what you're talking about is mutilation. Instead, clinicians want to help young people like Sky achieve their gender goals. Penkin explained to fellow professionals that requests for procedures that are non-binary were growing in number, but the field was still wedded, unfortunately, said Penkin, to binary assumptions. This means procedures such as nullification, which is to, get rid of literally all external genitals, or penile-preserving vaginoplasty, which is surgically crafting a pseudo-vagina underneath the penis, are not as accessible as they should be. And in fact, Penkin added that existing research and standards of care can't help patients. You have to go beyond what the research actually shows. You have to go beyond the science. Here is Amy Penkin, a social worker, speaking at a gathering of a major professional association for transgender health, U.S. PATH.
This is Sky, who's 18 years old. They recently graduated from high school and reports living on their own for the first time. At consult, they express a desire to look like, quote, a Barbie down there. They report being asexual, never having had sex, and having no desire to have sex in the future. Sky does not want to feel any pleasurable sensation and hopes removal of all erogenous tissue will be possible. And they come to our clinic with a referral and 2 letters of support for vulvoplasty surgery. We came to deliver this presentation because we recognize that the tools in our system, such as what is evidence-based practice in the research tell us, what are the standards of care tell us, that is not enough to meet the needs of our patients, and we need to take it to the next level to really think about how we evolve and match the needs of our patients as their needs are being expressed to us.
Now, that is an amazing statement. The last part of that patients express their needs to doctors as though they're simply going into the store and buying a cup of coffee, and the doctors are then designated with fulfilling the needs of their patients, is precisely the opposite of how medical science is supposed to work. It is the job of the doctor to diagnose. It is the job of the doctor to tell you about your own biology and what is true and what is false, but not so in the world of trans so-called medicine. A psychologist named Mare Marsiglio agreed and described doing just that. Here's Mare Marsiglio, a psychologist, talking about the idea that even people with multiple personality disorder or psychosis should not be barred from mutilating surgery.
And for example, if the surgeon isn't able to meet their requests, that may mimic some other ways in which the system has impacted them, dismissed their requests or dismissed their identity or erased them in some way. And so helping a patient think through why the surgeon is saying we may have to alter a treatment plan is a big part of my role. I also work to advocate for folks who have comorbid mental health symptoms that in other contexts may just be excluded from receiving care at all. So for example, patients who have multiple personalities or psychosis or other things that may make the surgical team uncomfortable. I also, given that I am on the surgical team and part of the hospital context, I can help the patient very specifically navigate care, especially within a surgery that has not been performed before or is of higher risk. I can be part of the care team in that way.
I mean, again, this is insane. This is truly insane. What you are talking about is people who have clinical problems who are being told that we should perform surgeries on them because they think a thing. People who are fully delusional. But when it comes to their desire to mutilate themselves, suddenly those delusions don't matter. Alrighty, in the meantime, speaking of bad science, climate change, a big study is now being removed. First, do you trust your internet service provider? You probably shouldn't. Depending on where you live, ISPs can log your activity for the government or even sell your browsing history to the highest bidder. The solution? Our sponsor, ExpressVPN. It's an app that reroutes your online traffic through encrypted servers, keeping it away from your ISP, data brokers, and other third parties. Of course, this only works if you trust your VPN provider. They're essentially transferring that trust from your ISP to them. So why do I trust ExpressVPN? Well, they received over 300 data requests from law enforcement and government entities in the past year alone. Not a single one resulted in customer data being exposed. You can read their transparency report on their website. It's actually fascinating. It's not that they refuse to comply with legal requests. They can cooperate, but here's the thing. You cannot hand over what you don't have in the first place. ExpressVPN does not even have activity logs, thanks to their specially engineered server architecture that runs on volatile memory, meaning nothing ever actually gets saved to the disk. It's privacy by design. I use ExpressVPN all the time. You can see I'm on the road. That means I'm using ExpressVPN because I'm on public Wi-Fi. Plus, it works seamlessly across all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets. It's genuinely easy to use. Just tap one button and you are now connected. So, if you want the VPN I trust to protect my online privacy, get ExpressVPN. In fact, you can get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN with my special link. Go to expressvpn.com/Ben. That's expressvpn.com/Ben to get 4 extra months. Also, I've been with our ad partner Pure Talk for a long time. Honestly, I've never seen them quite do anything like this before. So here's the deal. They're offering unlimited talk, unlimited text, unlimited data, plus a 30-gig hotspot for just $29.95 a month. And that price, it is locked in for the rest of your life. This is normally their premium plan. It goes for $65 a month. But if you switch before December 7th, you get it for $29.95 every single month from here on out. That's more than half off permanently. And yeah, it's all on their 5G network, so you're not sacrificing speed or coverage. Look, I know these kinds of offers don't stick around long. If you've been thinking about switching carriers, now's probably the time. Head on over to puretalk.com/Shapiro to grab this deal. And honestly, it's worth telling your friends or family about as well. If you have kids and you're thinking about getting any of them a first phone this Christmas, or you're just looking to cut some unnecessary costs, the Pure Talk deal is truly worth checking out. Great coverage, lower price, a company that shares your values. Make the switch in as little as 10 minutes. You got nothing to lose. Keep your phone, keep your number, start saving with unlimited for life for just $29.95 a month. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro to switch to my wireless company, Pure Talk. Tax and fees not included. Some restrictions apply. See puretalk.com for details. Offer ends 12/7/25. One of the most important things about this free press piece, the revelations in the free press piece, are the revelations with regard to groupthink. As the free press says, one of the biggest revelations from the recordings is how clinicians acknowledge performing unproven, seemingly experimental treatments. Only it appears there's often no protocol being followed, no formal research being conducted, no ethics board approval being sought. These practitioners say their goal is to fulfill the embodiment desires of their patient, whatever those may be, and doing this may require deviating from guidelines. And so people get together at conferences, and then they change the guidelines, the standards of care, in order to match what the quote-unquote patients would like from these particular quote-unquote medical practitioners. So, for example, the standards of care for WPATH, which was for a long time considered the sort of gold standard in terms of scientific groups on trans medicine. It was widely cited all the time by the legacy media. Their standards of care explain, quote, to be non-binary, one need only have an internal sense of gender. that is at odds with social expectations and associated with one's assigned sex. This includes indigenous and non-Western genders, as well as people whose genders are comprised of more than one gender identity simultaneously or at different times, who do not have a gender identity or who have a neutral gender identity, etc., etc., etc. One case involved a teen who said he realized Frank Enfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show was his gender identity. Now, in order to get all this done, what was required was groupthink. Here, for example, is a recording of British endocrinology consultant Leighton Seal explaining that the best way to avoid criticism was to make the decisions as a group.
And therefore, when you're doing operations that we have to accept that at some point somebody will regret the surgery they've done. So to allow people to move the field forward, you need to have a support network around you as a clinician, so that if that decision is made and that decision is regretted, how did you make that decision process? So as an individual practitioner, if you make that in isolation, you could be vulnerable to being criticised for doing something that is outside of the norm. Whereas if you have a network around you where a clinical team in concert with the individual has made a decision, you then have a framework to say, well, the ethics of this were explored. Because you have a situation where you can explore the ethics of that. Because we are doing procedures here where we don't have outcome data. So for a vaginoplasty, for a phalloplasty, there is long-term outcome data of what the pros, the cons, the psychological impact, the sexual functioning impact is. For these newer procedures, we don't have that outcome. So unless you want to go to individual ethics boards in each hospital to get ethics permission to do those surgeries because they're on the edge of the field of medicine, you need to have a mechanism around you to support you, otherwise you could be vulnerable.
And so, yeah, again, this is all insanity. And this was the way that people did quote-unquote medicine for a decade in this country at the cost of thousands of possible happy lives. Because the way that you make somebody actually fulfilled and happy is not by mutilating them at their own behest, particularly not if they are minors. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because let's be real. Conservatives won on this issue because reality was always going to win on this issue, even when it was unpopular. We here at the Daily Wire refused all the time, like from the outside of the company, to use so-called gendered pronouns. We refused to use people's chosen pronouns. Your pronoun was your sex, period. We never varied on this. This was a strong position of the company, and we knew, or at least we figured, that eventually truth would prevail. Why does this matter? Because it's not just that there are consequences in the field of trans for bad science. There are consequences for everyone. And this is also true in the world of the economy. So there is a major study that has now emerged to be false. There's a climate change study that was published in Nature. This is the Wall Street Journal reporting today. And apparently that widely cited study on economic damage from climate change. And apparently that widely cited study on economic damage from climate change was retracted following criticism from peers. That research, published last year in the prestigious journal Nature, projected the world's economic output would decline 62% by 2100 under a high carbon emission scenario, which is crazy. That is saying that, again, just by the statistics, the entire world economic output, thanks to global warming, would drop by 62%, right, by well over half. The estimate was much more severe than other forecasts. That prompted scrutiny of the underlying data. The study author, Leonie Wenz from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, said, "We broadly agree with the issues raised. We made corrections to the underlying economic data and to our methodology to address them. The changes are too substantial for a correction of the original article in Nature." In other words, they pulled the whole thing. The study had examined historical data from some 1,600 regions worldwide over the past 4 decades to project how changes in temperature and precipitation would affect economic growth, how it would affect agricultural yields, labor productivity, infrastructure. But after the study was published, other researchers found the economic data from one country, Uzbekistan, during a short time from 1995 to 1999 had skewed the results. Without Uzbekistan, the 2100 damage forecast fell to 23%, not 62%. And so they had to pull the study. Now, here's what's amazing. The study had already been cited by the time it was pulled by the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, the World Bank, and the Network for Greening the Financial System. That is a coalition of central banks the Federal Reserve was a part of under Joe Biden. The coalition which has members in about 90 countries, incorporated the damage forecast in risk tools banks could use to stress test portfolios to meet European regulations. So this horrible study was used in order to determine whether, in fact, banks could invest in certain things. Central bank models of the economic impacts of climate change have far-reaching implications. If the models show impacts are going to be much worse than previously thought, regulators could make banks set aside more capital to buffer against potential losses associated with those assets, meaning that banks would have to hold more cash back and not lend it out to other businesses because of the potential risk from climate change. So this study was just wrong. I mean, like overtly wrong, and they had to pull it. But it is on the basis of bad science that many, many decisions are made. And this is why it is a very good thing that the President of the United States has decided not to bow to the climate change extremists. And he announced yesterday that the administration would be lowering fuel economy rules for car makers. So in a time where cars are increasingly unaffordable, that's just a reality, thanks to CAFE standards, so-called CAFE standards. Those are corporate average fuel economy rules. The president is reversing that because he's saying, listen, global warming is not going to be sufficiently alleviated by the sorts of CAFE standards that you are putting in place to actually pay for the economic damage done to Americans by the regulations. All right, coming up, we're going to get to some more economic news. First, if you owe the IRS more than $5,000 in back taxes, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Priority Tax Relief. Look, I get it. Dealing with tax debt, stressful. Maybe you fell behind on filing. Maybe you had to pull from your 401k or just you hit a rough patch. Whatever has happened, Priority Tax Relief can help. They're a team of experienced tax attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents who've been doing this for over 15 years. These folks negotiate directly with the IRS on your behalf, and they are good at it. They've handled thousands of cases. They've helped clients reduce their tax debt significantly. Some people who owed 25 or even 50 grand were able to get that reduced to a fraction of the amount. They completely understand how overwhelming this situation can be. Their team walks you right through the process, step by step, so you're never in the dark about what's happening. And they move fast to stop or prevent things like liens, wage garnishments, and those penalties that just keep piling up. The IRS has stepped up their collection efforts lately, but Priority Tax Relief can step in before things escalate. They're offering a free consultation, no upfront fees, no obligation. Just go to PriorityTaxRelief.com/Ben. That's PriorityTaxRelief.com/Ben. See how they can help you get this resolved. Also, this Christmas season, you could help change a life. Actually, 2 lives. Picture a young woman who just found out she's pregnant and was not expecting it. She's scared. Maybe she doesn't have much support. She isn't sure what her options are. That's exactly who our sponsor, Preborn Ministries, is there for. They offer free ultrasounds and counseling to women facing tough decisions. Sometimes just seeing that ultrasound and talking to somebody who cares makes all the difference. If you're looking for a meaningful way to give this year, it might be worth considering. Steve Jobs, Celine Dion, Steph Curry, these were all unplanned pregnancies. Maybe you were too. Maybe someone you love was. Life has a way of working out differently than we expect. When a woman is facing that difficult decision, Preborn is there to help. When a woman sees that baby on the ultrasound or preborn, everything changes. The moment often gives her the courage to choose life. This Christmas, just $28 can sponsor an ultrasound. And right now, your gift is doubled through a matching grant. To donate, dial pound 250 and say baby, or visit preborn.com/Ben. That's pound 250, keyword baby, or preborn.com/Ben. You won't do anything more important this Christmas. So he said yesterday that he plans to roll back federal fuel economy rules for passenger vehicles. The administration's move comes months after Congress and the Trump administration essentially nullified those mandates by eliminating fines for violating them. Under the changes, the federal government would require an average of 34.5 miles a gallon for vehicles by model year 2031, down from 50.4 miles a gallon set by the Biden administration. Well, that makes a huge difference because, of course, cars that go 34.5 miles a gallon, much more plentiful and cheaper than cars that go 50.4 miles per gallon. The new regulatory system also does away with a system in which automakers can buy credits from competitors to offset fines, which is one of the ways that Tesla was making some money, because basically people were going to get a fine for selling their non-CAFE standards compliant cars, and so they would pay Tesla in order to essentially compensate Tesla for making green vehicles. Here's President Trump announcing all of this yesterday.
Today, my administration has taken historic action to lower costs for American consumers, protect American auto jobs, and make buying a car much more affordable for countless American families and also safer. We're officially terminating Joe Biden's ridiculously burdensome, horrible, actually, CAFE standards that imposed expensive restrictions and all sorts of problems, gave all sorts of problems to automakers And we're not only talking about here, we're talking about outside of our country, because nobody could do it. Nobody wanted to do it, and it was ridiculous, very expensive. It put tremendous upward pressure on car prices, combined with the insane electric vehicle mandate. Biden's burdensome regulations helped cause the price of cars to soar more than 25%. And in one case, they went up 18% in 1 year. Today, we're taking one more step to kill the Green New scam. It's part of the greatest scam, probably, well, other than Russia, and a few others I could name. The greatest scam in American history, the Green New scam. And it's a quest to end the gasoline-powered car. This is what they wanted to do, even though we have more gasoline than any other country by far. And people want the gasoline car. They want everything. They want electric. They want to have lots of alternatives, but they do want the gasoline car. Right now, it's leading away by a lot. The car business is a very interesting business, but we want to keep it that way.
Okay, so the president happens to be right about all of this. And if you are worried about jobs, if you are worried about a supply of cars for cheaper, then you do have to do away with these bad standards. This is an unequivocally good economic measure taken by President Trump. The chief executives of Ford and Jeep maker Stellantis joined President Trump in making the announcement. A GM plant manager was also in attendance. The Trump administration dubbed the plan Freedom Means Affordable Cars proposal, said it would save Americans $109 billion over the next 5 years. Again, this is a way to achieve affordability. People keep saying affordability over and over and over. And as I've said many, many times, the only way to achieve affordability, which means cheaper prices, is to reduce demand or to increase supply. Those are the only two alternatives. One of the ways you increase supply of cheaper goods is to remove the regulatory burdens in making those goods. Good for President Trump for not following the insanity of, for example, the Europeans, who basically destroyed their own economy on the basis of their insane green agenda. I mean, it truly is unbelievable what the Europeans actually did. The Europeans made the decision that they were going to cripple their own economy on the basis of things like climate change. I mean, just a few days ago, there was a large-scale report in the Wall Street Journal about how Europe did this, and we were not going to follow that path under President Trump. Just a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal wrote, European politicians pitched the continent's green transition to voters as a win-win. Citizens would benefit from green jobs and cheap, abundant solar and wind energy alongside a sharp reduction in carbon emissions. Nearly 2 decades on, the promise has largely proved costly for consumers and damaging for the economy. Europe succeeded in slashing its carbon emissions more than any other region, by 30% from 2005 levels, compared with a 17% drop in the United States. But the rush to renewables drove up electricity prices in much of the continent. In fact, what you see is, in terms of cents per kilowatt hour, the electricity prices in the UK for cents per kilowatt hour, 33.8 cents per kilowatt hour. In the United States, 8.1 cents per kilowatt hour. Because it turns out that when you decide to go green, you also decide to make your economy significantly less effective. According to the Wall Street Journal, this is crippling industry. It is hobbling Europe's ability to attract key economic drivers like AI, which requires cheap and abundant electricity. The shift is also adding to a cost of living shock for consumers that is fueling support for anti-establishment parties, which correctly portray the green transition as an elite project that harms workers, consumers, and regions. This is correct. So President Trump is doing the reverse. This is an unalloyed good from President Trump right here. Now, meanwhile, what the Trump administration should do, aside from these sort of broad regulatory cuts, what they should do is they should stop engaging in a sort of pick and choose economy. All of the messing around with the economy, everything from the tariffs to the sort of subsidization and regulation schemes that have been fostered by parts of the Trump administration, that stuff doesn't help. There is a report out yesterday from ADP that says that hiring by American businesses actually dropped last month. Private employers shed 32,000 jobs in November, according to ADP. That is a swing from 47,000 private sector jobs ADP estimated were added in October. ADP's numbers, again, they're kind of the only numbers we have right now because the Bureau of Labor Statistics has not released any of its stats for September or October and won't release its look at November until December 16th. It's 2.5 weeks behind schedule. Weaker hiring is a concern for the Federal Reserve, obviously. The Trump administration would like to see the Federal Reserve lower interest rates again to inject more liquidity into the economy. That, of course, may spur more investment, but it will also increase prices because it is just more money flowing into the economy. Now, what will not work is this attempt to play around with the economy in terms of tariffs and then cut people a check on the back end. That's just helicopter money. Mark Meadows, President Trump's former chief of staff, was making the case that Trump should do that come next year. To me, this is no different than a Biden stimulus plan.
I think the other thing that should be coming out that actually will make things, if you want to use the word affordable, I think the Trump checks. I'm in favor of that. As a conservative member, some of my colleagues and friends are not for that, but I think these $2,000 Trump tariff checks need to go out next year. That will be something that actually others can spend the money and maybe reduce some of the pain of the higher inflationary prices they're seeing at the grocery store.
So, again, this to me is a bad policy. Broad economic deregulation, more innovation, higher productivity. These are the things that are going to generate affordability. They're going to generate economic growth. Good for the president with regard to the CAFE standards. That is a big move. Okay, meanwhile, controversy for some reason continues to roil around the Pete Hegseth issue. When I say the issue, there are really two. So issue number one continues to be the allegation that he authorized the secondary strike on a Venezuelan drug boat in international waters after the first strike basically incapacitated the boat. The evidence on this, extremely, extremely scanty. By this, I mean there's one Washington Post story that makes this claim, and there's a New York Times story that basically rejects the claim. That's not stopping Democrats and liberals in the media, who of course are their adjunct, from continuing to go after Hegseth on this. Here is Sunny Hostin, great legal luminary, making the case.
I just want to make it very clear that if this second strike, I feel like I'm in A Few Good Men. Who ordered the code red? You ordered the code red. I think that Pete Hegseth clearly ordered the code red here. Yeah. And I also think that that would be a war crime. And it's very clear. You speak to anybody from JAG, you speak to Senator, California Representative Ted Lieu, who's a former JAG officer. He has said this is a war crime. And the sad thing about it is if you do follow an unlawful order and you're in the military, you can be court-martialed and you can be prosecuted and you can be put in jail.
Just like in A Few Good Men. They set you up. He set up the military. He set it up. And I'm sorry, the buck stops with him.
Yes.
It's his job, whatever it's called, Department of Defense, war, booty, whatever.
Can I tell you something? It's a department of lies, because I don't know why they don't just tell us that they want regime change in Venezuela instead of fabricating all of this stuff.
Because this is a better distraction. Because, yes, that's exactly right. We'll be right back.
Okay, this dog is not going to hunt. If Democrats really believed that Americans are deeply upset about an allegation that probably is not true, and again, we lack evidence to suggest that it is true, that is not going to work. So they're now dredging up another report from the Pentagon. According to the Wall Street Journal, a Pentagon watchdog has found Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth violated some of the department's regulations when he shared sensitive information from his cell phone on Signal earlier this year, according to Senator Mark Kelly. And again, Mark Kelly is trying to set himself up for a potential 2028 run. He's trying to claim that he's essentially a moderate with a military and NASA background, and therefore he's the one who can restore America to glory, as opposed to these crazy, crazy people over at the Hegseth Department of War. The Defense Department Inspector General concluded that as Pentagon chief, Hegseth has the authority to declassify Defense Department information, which suggests the Defense Secretary didn't break the law. So, just to be straight, Democrats are now claiming that Hegseth violated departmental regulations when he was on a Signal chat with now UN Ambassador Mike Waltz and some others, including the vice president. But the same report said he didn't violate the law, so I'm not sure why exactly Democrats are trying to make hay out of this one. It's not stopping them. And again, this all plays into a sort of resistance-minded left that is going pretty far out on a limb here to suggest that President Trump and company are in violation of military law. In fact, Senator Mark Warner is now arguing that the uniformed military may have to save us from President Trump.
I want to get the truth, and I'm not sure we've had the truth from Hegseth yet. Remember, this is an administration that has treated the uniformed military with unprecedented disrespect when they were all brought to get a pep rally in front of Hegseth and Trump. This is an administration that's fired, uniform generals from the head of the NSA, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I think in many ways, the uniformed military may help save us from this president and his lame people like Hegseth, because I think their commitment is to the Constitution and obviously not to Trump, and I expect Bradley to adhere to that.
Okay, so again, the underlying tone here is that the military is going to save us from civilian rule, which is a pretty wild move here from Democrats. Now, what's amazing about this is that the Democratic desperation seems to me somewhat unjustified. The current trend lines suggest that Democrats will do pretty well in 2026. That is what the polling suggests. Harry Enton and CNN analyzed the polling in the aftermath of Republicans winning the 7th congressional district, but by a far narrower margin than they probably should have. And he says, listen, Republicans better watch out for 2026.
Republicans should be running for the hills this morning because the blue wave is building, my dear friend, Mr. Berman. What are we talking about here? Well, Matt Van Epps, the Republican candidate, he won it by 9, but this is a district that Donald Trump won by 22 points, 15 points, 17 points. This is a 13-point gain for the Democrats in terms of the margin, and excuse time for Republicans is over, because I hear all about these special elections. Oh, the turnout's so low. It's not representative of what happened in the midterm election. The turnout last night in Tennessee's 7th district was equal to the turnout in the 2022 midterm election. So the blue wave, it seems to be building right out of center of Tennessee.
Okay, now again, one of the facts about that Tennessee special election is that every single county in the 7th congressional district swung to the left. All of them, including Nashville. So Democrats did not win the seat, but they are outperforming expectations at this point. And it seems that Democrats are learning some lessons, and this means that Republicans have to stop being stupid. They have to not make dumb mistakes, because Democrats seem to be moving away from some of their dumber errors. So, for example, this is Gavin Newsom. I'm not a Gavin Newsom fan, as everyone knows. The California governor and we have had our differences and continue to have our differences, because I think that he is one of the more lizard-like humans in American politics. With that said, Gavin Newsom is now trying to play to the middle by telling his own party that they need to be more normal. Now, that may be an unnatural position for somebody like Gavin Newsom or for a very radical Democratic Party. But the fact that Gavin Newsom, who again is a bellwether, he puts his finger in the wind and then he moves in the direction of the wind. The fact that he can sense that Democrats need to normalize, that should scare Republicans. Republicans can't count on Democrats just being bad at this to win.
But I think there's a broader narrative that we have to address. That is, we have to be more culturally normal. We have to be a little less judgmental. We have to be a party that understands the importance and power of the border, substantively and politically. We have a party that I think needs to design and develop a compelling economic vision for the future, where people feel included, to reconcile the fact that if we don't democratize our economy, we're not going to save democracy. And I don't think it's healthy that we have 10% of people that own 2/3 the wealth in this country. I don't think it's sustainable practice. The folks watching Mr. Beast, disproportionately 30-year-olds, the first generation in history not doing better than their parents. There's some underlying issues here.
Okay, again, listen to Newsom try to tack toward the middle. There are a bunch of issues that Democrats seem to be leaving behind. We opened the show by talking about the trans issue. Democrats are not talking about this issue anymore, even when they are asked about the issue, even when they take the wrong side of the issue. Instead, they're punting. That's what Abigail Spanberger did in running for Virginia governor, because she was on the wrong side of the issue, but she knew enough to keep her mouth shut. When it comes to immigration, Democrats are sounding off a lot about ICE internally. They're talking about ICE tracking down people internally and deporting them, but there are no Democrats, of whom I'm aware, who are coming out regularly and talking about the evil Trump administration shutting down the southern border. Even Democrats have acknowledged that this is a win for the Trump administration. Why are they acknowledging it? Because it takes the issue completely off the table. If Democrats are not going to reopen the border Biden style, then why ought you fear Democrats with regard to new waves of illegal immigration? So Democrats are taking trans off the table by not talking about it. They're taking the southern border off the table because Trump largely solved the problem, and they're not campaigning to reopen the southern border. DEI, you've noticed the word equity seems not to be the word of the day or this year. Democrats are not talking about equity like Kamala Harris talked about equity. They're no longer talking about racial set-asides. They're no longer talking about the 1619 Project. And this is the pattern, by the way, in American politics, is that one side gets high in its own supply after victory and decides to move pretty far to either the right or the left based on their victory. And the other side tacks away from whatever tactics drove it to lose. And so the only point I'm making here is that Democrats may be learning their lesson, and Republicans should be careful of that. You cannot always count on your opponents to suck at this. You cannot. Democrats, their big mistake, by the way, in Tennessee 7 is that they ran somebody who was really, really far to the left. If they'd run a moderate in Tennessee 7, that margin is not 9 points. That margin is maybe 2 points or 3 points. They ran a bad candidate, and they kind of came close to pulling it off. Why does this matter for Republicans? Because it means Republicans need to find an issue set that is popular with the American people. We'll get to more on Democrats. Are they going to have a big wave? In just a second. First, our biggest deal of the year is here. Right now, you can join Daily Wire Plus for half the price. Get every show, every investigation, every film, every series, all for 50% off. That includes your access to the Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin, premiering January 22nd exclusively on Daily Wire Plus. All access members get early access to episodes 1 and 2 on Christmas Day. 50% off all annual Daily Wire Plus memberships. Join now at dailywire.com/cyberweek. All right, it's time for some fast facts. Speaking of immigration, Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, when I say Democrats may be catching on, they may be jettisoning some of their less popular views. Here was Hakeem Jeffries just yesterday saying that President Trump does get credit for shutting the southern border. When do you hear Democrats ever giving credit? There is strategery at work, gang.
And it is true that the polls show, in terms of the tactics used, that the majority, they don't like the tactics being used. But in terms of the border, securing the border, can you give President Trump any credit for securing the border? Because as you know, that was a big issue under the Biden administration when you had record border crossings, and those border crossings have gone down dramatically. Can you give him credit for that?
The border is secure. That's a good thing. It's happened on his watch. He wants to claim credit for it. Of course, he'll get credit for that. In terms of making sure that we actually deal with the issues that matter, including on immigration or beyond, there's a lot that is left to be desired.
Okay, so again, pretty astonishing that Democrats have to acknowledge that Trump shut the border. They have to, and they should, because it takes the issue off the table for Republicans. Republicans, however, are looking to not allow that issue to get away from them. According to Breitbart, a bill to end federal benefits, including Medicaid, housing assistance, student financial aid, and food stamps for non-citizens, has now been introduced by Senator Tom Cotton in an effort to put American citizens first. The proposal was released Wednesday morning, with the third-ranking Senate Republican writing in an authorization to denaturalize naturalized citizens who undermine domestic tranquility by participating in unlawful protests involving violence or property destruction, and to expand expedited removal authority. The bill also addresses concerns regarding Afghan nationals living in the United States. If passed, the legislation would require mandatory revetting of nationals of Afghanistan and provide for automatic termination of TPS, that's temporary protected status. So, again, this is a strong anti-illegal immigration move and a strong move against naturalized citizens who are on welfare. You know, people who have come here and taken advantage of the system. And this will be popular, right? If Republicans are looking for an issue set, the issue that most unifies by every poll the Republican base is the immigration issue, particularly criminal illegal immigrants, immigrants from countries that are not generally friendly to the United States, or areas of the world that have significant terror backgrounds. By the way, that's only going to be exacerbated by stories that seem to be emerging now every day of immigrants to the country from radical Muslim areas of the world who are importing that radicalism here. According to the New York Post, a Pakistani immigrant and University of Delaware student was arrested with a cache of guns, ammo, and body armor, and a manifesto allegedly explaining plans to kill all and achieve martyrdom with a mass shooting on the school's campus. The shooter was arrested just before midnight, November 24th, after cops found him in his pickup truck in a park after hours and decided to search the car when he began acting suspiciously. Inside, they found a bunch of guns, a bunch of ammo. There was a pistol that fit into a kit that converted it into a semi-automatic rifle. They also found a notebook with handwritten notes detailing a plot to use the weapons to shoot up his former school's campus police department, including a map of the headquarters. It included phrases like kill all, martyrdom. So, yeah, I think that this kind of immigration we probably don't need. And Republicans understand that. This is why, if Democrats are smart, they're going to move away from the anti-ICE position they've been taking. Right, so far, they're acknowledging that Trump is largely right on the southern border, but they're ripping on ICE. I'm not sure how much they can continue to rip on immigration and customs enforcement while ICE targets possible criminal illegal immigrants. It's not going to help if you have people like Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman from Michigan, claiming that we should stop investigating immigration after the National Guard shooting. Instead, we should investigate CIA death squads or some such nonsense.
Do you mind if I ask you about the Trump administration possibly banning travel after what happened with the National Guard shooting?
Everybody knows how I feel about, as a Muslim in America, blatantly blaming a whole nationality. It's not how we should do it.
You feel the same way with the asylum applications, if they pause those?
I don't know, maybe investigate the death squad of the CIA first.
So, again, this sort of perspective, it ain't going to help Democrats. It's also not going to help Democrats to trot out Minneapolis City Council member Jamal Osman, who says that ICE asking people for their documentation is something like Nazi Germany, which, no. I mean, that's going to be a big no.
Yes, folks have done, horrible things, and people have committed crimes, but we should not be pointing the entire community in one brush and being singled out as fellow Americans. There's a justice, there's a process of due process, and I believe those folks have been dealt with by the state leaders. And but now President Donald Trump singling out and attacking one group of people, and ICE being on our streets and asking people documentation. It feels like we are in 1930s, 1940s in Germany.
No. That's going to be a big no, actually. One thing that was not happening in the 1930s and 1940s in Germany was, people being targeted by the government trying to immigrate to Germany. That was not an actual major problem, as it turns out. It was people largely trying to escape and get out. So there's that. If Democrats continue to be radical on this issue, this is an issue Republicans can win on. Republicans can also turn toward attacks on the media. They're going by the tried and true. Now, again, is all this going to be successful? Republicans, I remember, tried this during the first Trump administration during the midterm elections in 2018. In 2018, Donald Trump shifted the focus toward illegal immigration. Right before the midterms, it did not work for them. We'll see if he does better this time on that issue. Obviously, attacks on the media will continue. As well, they should. Here is Scott Bessent going after the New York Times at the Deal Book Summit.
How should this is like a new? Is this a new normal?
That Andrew, there's no new normal, and I can tell you that I actually don't read the New York Times anymore. That sometimes I do watch CNBC, but occasionally people send me articles, and there's just this fever swamp, and you're now a pop historian with 1929, and in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The New York Times is no longer the paper of record. You can't go. I read this article. President Trump is slowing down. President Trump's mental capacity. It is 100% fake. That he only called me twice at 2 a.m. last week, instead of 3 times.
You're saying he called you? I believe that he called you at 2 or 3 a.m.
That whole narrative.
Okay, and of course, Bessent is right about this. And one of the funny things about members of the objective media is that all their errors tend to move in one direction as a general rule. So Republicans, of course, are going to be able to target the media. So immigration, targeting the media. I would assume deregulation will have to be a part of this, right? Which is why when it comes to things like healthcare, it is quite important for the Trump administration to come up with some sort of solution that bends the cost curve. Now, Democrats have set up a trap. They always did. Obamacare was a trap. Obamacare was a lie. It was predicated on the idea that massive government interventionism in the system, burdensome red tape, huge new programs would suddenly lower the cost curve. That didn't happen. I asked our sponsors over at Comet, a project of perplexity, how much have healthcare costs risen since the advent of Obamacare? How much additional funding will be required over the next 10 years to keep those costs to their original estimates? Well, we're way beyond the original estimates at this point. According to Comet, national health spending per person rose from roughly the low $7,000 range in 2010 to about $14,500 per person by 2023. That's in 2023 dollar terms. That's an increase of roughly 30% in real per capita terms over that period. So, per enrollee spending in private insurance grew by more than 80% from 2008 to 2013, outpacing both Medicare and Medicaid. By the way, that's not a statement on behalf of Medicare and Medicaid, both of which have been shifting people off their roles in bizarre ways. Also, even if you're on Medicare, Medicaid, very often you can't see the doctor you want in the first place. As far as future costs that will be required, hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies will be required just to maintain the current cost curve. Democrats, of course, call this a win. Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, one of the Obamacare founders, says that Obamacare was a good first step, but it's 15 years old. That's not the way that durable programs are supposed to work. If you have to keep adjusting the thing every 15 years with $400 billion infusions, it's not working right.
The last 2 years, it's gone up and up and at a very high clip. We need to do 3 steps. 1, extend the subsidies for 2 years. Give Congress a 6-month deadline to get a affordability package together, like the 5 points I've suggested, that they have to not just propose, but pass and enact, right? And then we need to work on a more comprehensive solution. Obamacare is, the Affordable Care Act was a very good step, but it's now 15 years old. No company puts in place its strategic plan and works on it and doesn't look at again for 15 years.
Okay, but the problem was that Obamacare was supposed to solve this. This is what Obamacare was designed, or maybe it was never designed to solve this. And this is the point that Republicans need to make. The only way to start bending the cost curve with regard to healthcare is to rejigger the entire regulatory structure. Do Republicans have the stomach for that? I doubt it. Doing nothing is probably the more lucrative path politically for Republicans, which I assume is why Tony Fabrizio, the pollster for President Trump, advises House Republicans to stop talking about Obamacare tax credits and instead to start talking about reducing drug prices. Yeah, that's not the worst plan I've ever heard. But is this going to be a boon for Republicans? I don't know. I also think that it's not going to be a boon for Republicans if the war in Ukraine not only continues, but if Vladimir Putin continues to grow closer to winning that war. According to the Washington Post, Vladimir Putin has refused every compromise in Moscow. That continues apace. According to the Washington Post, 5 hours of talks in Moscow between the U.S. delegation and Russian President Putin over a U.S. plan to resolve the war in Ukraine ended without a compromise option, according to the Kremlin. They said that their military victories were swaying the Americans. They feel they have the upper hand right now. So far, no compromise option has been found, but some American proposals appear more or less acceptable, said Putin's top foreign aide, Yuri Ushakov, who attended the meeting. The president did not hide our critical or negative views of certain proposals. Ushakov added that Russian successes on the front in recent weeks have had a positive impact on the course and nature of the talks and forced the U.S. and the West to make more adequate assessments of the situation in Ukraine. So in other words, they think they're winning, so why compromise? You know, the American people don't tend to like losing to the Russians, just as a general rule. There's a lot of talk constantly about withdrawals. The reality is that Americans are okay with the general concept of withdrawal. What they don't like is the ugliness that happens in its immediate aftermath. And, you know, it's easy to talk about Ukraine and Russia as though America failing to remain involved has no cost. The American people do not like ugly pictures on their TV of people falling from wheel wells or Russians marching through Kyiv. That is not something that they are going to like very much. Alrighty, we have reached the end of today's show. We'll be back here tomorrow with much more. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. We're 1 year into the new Trump administration, so how's it going? Plus, President Trump gets ready to go to Davos, and his team begins to unveil their strategy for geopolitics. How does that stack up with the rest of the world? We'll get to all that in a moment. First, the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, premieres tomorrow on Daily Wire Plus. After 3 years of writing, filming across 2 continents, and relentless post-production, our most ambitious entertainment project ever is finally ready to be released. You're not going to want to miss it. It's a 7-episode cinematic epic built at a scale that is the most ambitious of any company in the independent media space ever. Episodes 1 and 2 premiere tomorrow exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. It is the story of Merlin, but before the story you think you know, the legend you think you know. If you're not yet a Daily Wire Plus member, now would be the moment to join and experience what real premium entertainment looks like. Get 35% off an annual Daily Wire Plus membership, or choose the Pendragon Pass and get 3 months of Daily Wire Plus for just $30 with 1 month absolutely free. With the Pendragon Pass, you also receive exclusive Pendragon collectible cards and an automatic entry to win a trip for two to Budapest, one of the primary filming locations of the series. Head on over to dailywireplus.com right now. Be there when episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, premiere tomorrow, only at Daily Wire Plus. So yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of President Trump's reascension to the highest office in our land. In celebration, the White House released a press release, 365 wins in 365 days, celebrating President Trump's second term in office, the first year of which is now complete. And there are a lot of wins to his name, for sure. There are economic wins. The stock market is at all-time highs. The GDP numbers are coming in very hot for Q3 and Q4. Inflation is radically down from where it was under Joe Biden. On foreign policy, the President of the United States is responsible for bombing the Iranian nuclear facility over in Fordo and for ending the Gaza war, although we'll have to see exactly how that plays out with the Gaza board. He's responsible for helping to prevent deeper conflict between India and Pakistan and for ending conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, among other conflicts in which he has intervened. He's responsible, again closer to home, for getting rid of DEI throughout the federal government and for enforcing our nation's southern border, shutting off the spigot that was sending legitimately hundreds of thousands of people per month across the American southern border. And, of course, he's responsible for activating ICE to go after people who ought not be here in the first place, meaning we now have a net loss of migrant population in the United States for the first time in years. So there are a lot of wins for the president to stand on. And yesterday he held a press conference in which he made this pretty clear. In fact, he brought with him his book of accomplishments, which he then apparently threw on the floor.
Here's the book. These are all things we have. I'm going to read a few of the samples, but look at this. These are all, each line is something that we did. Nobody did that before. And it's big stuff, too. Look, we have the hottest country in the world.
He reads that book the way I read ads for Jeremy's Razors. I really do enjoy that. The president just taking it and chucking it on the ground because he's got better things to do. The reality is, of course, it has been a very effective first year for the second term of the Trump administration overall. He went ahead and said that God was very proud of his first year, which, again, you would imagine most presidents would believe about their performance in office.
Do you feel like God is proud of the effort that you've put in?
I do, actually. I think God is very proud of the job I've done. And that includes for religion. You know, we're protecting a lot of people that are being killed. Christians and Jewish people, and lots of people are being protected by me that wouldn't be protected by another type of president.
Again, he's not wrong about that either. And the president says that a huge number of the new jobs that have been created are private sector as opposed to in the public sector on the federal level because of things like Doge. Here he was explaining about job growth in the private sector.
Under Trump, 100% of all new jobs created have been in the private sector. Think of that. Not 1% has gone to federal. So under Biden, 1 out of 4 was a government job. Under Trump, 100% of the new jobs created, 100% came from the private sector. That's how you make your country wealthy and strong and good.
Again, he is not wrong about that either. And while job creation has lagged behind the robustness of the market, the hope, of course, is that productivity increases will eventually result in job increases as well. The president of the United States also pointed out the reverse migration that has followed hard upon his shutting of the southern border and his activation of immigration and customs enforcement in the interior of the United States.
For the first time in 50 years, we are now seeing reverse migration, where because we're getting all of these illegal people out. People that came in illegally, in many cases they're criminals, in many, many cases. Remember when they used to say that the people that come into our country as immigrants are very nice people, they're wonderful people, they don't commit crime. No, they make our criminals look like babies. They make our Hell's Angels look like the sweetest people on earth. The Hell's Angels are now considered a nice, high-quality person.
Now, with all of that said, the reality is that the president does end his first year in his second term in a pretty bad position in terms of his approval ratings. According to the Real Clear Politics polling average, the president's disapproval rating is currently standing at about 56%. His approval rating is standing on average at about 42.5%. That is, of course, down wildly from where it was even 1 year ago. If you go back about a year, where you end up with is the president riding about 50% in the approval ratings, disapproval ratings of 45%. So you've seen the numbers orienting in the wrong direction for the president. And again, we've looked at all these victories, and you wonder what's going wrong. And the biggest thing that it feels like is going wrong is mostly just a feeling of unsettledness. It feels as though everything is in flux. It feels as though economically things are in flux, thanks to both the fact that AI is developing and nobody kind of knows what that's going to do, but also the fact that we've had these gigantic tariff wars that seem to bob and flow every 5 seconds. On the foreign policy front, we've had an awful lot of chaos because nobody seems to know what is the thoroughgoing message of the Trump administration. And that seems to be exacerbated by the latest hubbub about Greenland and tariffs and fights with NATO and fights with our European allies. Well, Davos, the World Economic Forum, is on. It began this week. A huge number of big names are coming. That's particularly true of the Trump administration. According to CNBC, President Trump is attending in person today. We will be breaking down that speech. We'll, of course, have updates a little bit later on in the day about that speech and other speeches, but we'll do our sort of full breakdown tomorrow on the show. He gave a virtual address last year at the WEF, and it shook up the event. Davos organizers, according to CNBC, are keen to talk up the numbers they expect to attend. They said about 3,000 cross-sector leaders and a record 400 political leaders. But a bunch of people are not intending to come, and that includes a number of European leaders who are concerned with the president's quite confrontational stance with regard to Greenland. There's some other big names who are not showing up as well. Chinese President Xi Jinping is not showing up. Neither are the leaders of Brazil or India. Apparently, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Italian leader Giorgia Meloni are not currently on the WEF list. Both are reported to be attending at some point. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was originally supposed to attend. Apparently, that is not going to happen. However, big showing from the Trump administration. The U.S. delegation will include, of course, the president, but also the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is already there. Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and advisor Jared Kushner are apparently showing up as well. Well, among the people who are already there are Howard Lutnick, who is the Commerce Secretary, and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Howard Lutnick gave a speech at Davos yesterday in which he suggested that globalization has failed.
We are in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind. And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine. You shouldn't offshore your semiconductors. You shouldn't offshore your entire industrial base and have it be hollowed out beneath you. You should not be dependent.
Now, again, what's kind of astonishing about the statements that Lutnick is making right there is that some of it obviously is true, that when you offshore, for example, the autonomy of your country to international bodies, it prevents you from acting on behalf of your citizenry. But if the idea is that free trade itself is the problem, which seems to be something that he is promoting there, or if the idea is that every country should start to reshore its key facilities or its key trading apparatus, if that happens, what you're looking at is a significantly more multipolar world, not a world dominated by the United States of America. At the very same time that Howard Lutnick was saying that, the Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, was there, and he was encouraging the Europeans to take a deep breath, not to escalate with President Trump as President Trump pressures them over Greenland.
4 years in, the Europeans are still financing the war against themselves.
All right, let's talk about.
But Joe, what I do want to say is, same thing that I said after Liberation Day on April 2nd. Everyone, take a deep breath. Do not escalate. Do not escalate. And President Trump has a strategy here. Hear him out, and then everything will be fine.
Okay, so he seems to be saying kind of the reverse of Howard Lutnick, meaning we are not starting trade wars just for the hell of it. The goal, presumably, is some broader end. At the same time, Scott Bessent is also putting pressure on the Europeans not to buy Russian oil. He's saying they're financing war against themselves. So there are some ideological differences in the administration as to what exactly the Trump administration means here.
And just to be clear, that we have Europe buying Russian oil still 4 years later, they are financing the war against themselves. India started buying Russian oil after the conflict began, but President Trump put a 25% tariff on them, and India has geared down and has stopped buying Russian oil. And then 3, China is a very large buyer of Russian oil, as they are of Iranian oil, as they were of Venezuelan oil.
Okay, so again, he is right about all of this, but it's sort of fascinating to hear the difference in approach between Bessent, who seems to be encouraging the Europeans to take an anti-Russian, anti-Chinese stand, and Lutnick, who seems to be encouraging everybody to, quote-unquote, look out for themselves, because the United States also wants to look out for itself. Now, an enormous amount of what is happening right now is really just blowback, not to free trade per se, but to a particular vision of the world that was first expressed by George H.W. Bush back in 1990 in the aftermath of the Cold War, in the aftermath of the Soviet Union falling. So George H.W. Bush did a number of appearances ranging from session of Congress to national TV to international summits, where he talked about what was called the New World Order. And this became a term utilized in sort of the American body politic to mean, I think, what Lutnick is talking about and some of what Bessent is talking about and some of what Trump is talking about. This sort of New World Order was this utopian vision in which America would outsource her key interests to a globally interested group of like-minded people, all of whom, and he really meant this, all of whom would center in on freedom and liberty as the load-bearing foundations of the new civilization. Okay, in just a moment, I want to go back in time and talk about what set off this entire firestorm over American foreign policy, and that is the sort of New World Order constructed in the aftermath of the death of the USSR. First, the American dream has always been about building something of your own, taking an idea, some hard work, turning it into a thriving business you can call your own. For generations, entrepreneurship has been the cornerstone of that dream, but getting started used to mean huge upfront costs, technical headaches, and a mountain of obstacles before you could even open your doors. That's where our sponsor Shopify comes in. It's the tool that puts the American dream within reach for anyone ready to chase it. Shopify is the commerce platform powering millions of businesses worldwide, including 10% of all U.S. e-commerce and even our own Daily Wire shop. The best part? You don't need to be a web designer to get started. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand right out of the box. Or, if you need some extra help along the way, their AI tools can handle everyday tasks like enhancing product images, writing product descriptions, and generating discount codes. If you're worried about getting your brand out there, Shopify makes it simple to run email and social media campaigns that actually reach customers. Plus, if you ever get stuck, their award-winning 24/7 customer support is always there to help you figure things out. This year, turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. Here's what it sounded like when George H.W. Bush talked about what he called the New World Order in 1990.
A new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. We have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, because it is that thing that has been rejected not by President Trump, but by reality. This idea that we were going to live in a world in which East and West, North and South, all coordinated to pursue justice rather than the law of the jungle, in which the rule of law, the international rule of law, would supplant that rule of the jungle, in which nations would all recognize their shared responsibility for freedom. That never materialized because it was never true. It was never true. It turns out that nations do have their own interests. Now, that raises the question as to what should the geopolitics of the world look like? What exactly should the world look like? Now, we've seen a bunch of different visions here, because the truth is that the George H.W. Bush sort of Wilsonian vision of world order was then followed by Bill Clinton's Wilsonian vision of world order and George W. Bush's Wilsonian vision of world order. And here I'm referencing Woodrow Wilson, who believed in this sort of gigantic global agreement about what was right and what was wrong in international law, and no longer would power politics be at the center of international conflict. Barack Obama, for his part, led from behind because he believed this in part too. Now, there were obviously variations in foreign policy here. George W. Bush's foreign policy was significantly more muscular than, for example, Barack Obama's. Barack Obama's foreign policy was a foreign policy that suggested that America was inherently bad and therefore should not take a leading role in this new world order, whereas George W. Bush thought the United States should take a leading role in this new world order. But again, the idea was that there would be international rule by international standards, which is why presumably the United States, for example, in the run-up to both the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, saw UN approval and UN intervention. Now, the reality that President Trump has recognized that this never was going to work, that this was always going to be false, that actually the law of the jungle does apply on the world stage. But that doesn't answer the question as to what the United States should pursue. Should the United States pursue a more balkanized vision of the world in which a huge number of countries are in conflict with one another and the United States does not take a leading role? Or should the United States take a more hawkishly realistic view of the world in which the United States pursues its interests, but recognizes that it's going to need allies in pursuit of that interest, in which the United States recognizes key opponents like, say, Russia and China and Iran, and recognizes key areas of interest like, for example, freedom of the seas, ensuring the non-nuclearization of Iran, preventing the intervention of Russia in Eastern Europe? Or is the United States going to withdraw from the world and basically say, everybody have at it, it's every man for himself, the United States ought not take a leading role because it weakens us to be involved in the world? That is the question that still needs answering. And this is a question that, bizarrely enough, seems to be taking the fore thanks to President Trump's focus on Greenland. Why Greenland? Well, because Greenland, again, was not really on the bingo card. The reality is that you could make a case that the United States should support Ukraine more strongly. You could make, I think, a significantly weaker case the United States should not support Ukraine as strongly, or that the United States should shift pretty much all of the onus for defending Ukraine onto Europe without any sort of real transitional plan. You can make all of those cases. But when you're talking about going after Greenland as a sort of pure imperialist measure, because let's be real about this, the President of the United States is not trying to grab Greenland because it is necessary for us to up our military presence. We can do that under current treaty obligations. Under current defense treaties, we have the ability to build new military bases on Greenland pretty much any time we want. What the president is talking about is grabbing control of Greenland so as to presumably enlarge the territory of the United States. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that as sort of a general rule, but the idea that this is a main priority of the United States and that it has to do with deterring the Russians, that is definitely a strange proposition coming from an administration that has been at best, somewhat lackluster in its support of Ukraine, which is currently still fighting an existential war against Russia. Well, the President of the United States continues to go after Greenland. He, at this White House press conference yesterday, suggested that a deal will be made with NATO over Greenland.
I think something's going to happen that's going to be very good for everybody. Nobody's done more for NATO than I have, as I said before, in every way. Getting them to go up to 5% of GDP was something that nobody thought was possible, and pay. At 2%, they weren't paying. At 5%, they are paying. And they're buying a lot of things from us, and they're giving them, I guess, to Ukraine. That's up to them, but they're giving them to whoever they're giving them to, but they're buying a lot. I think that we will work something out where NATO is going to be very happy and where we're going to be very happy. But we need it for security purposes.
Okay, now again, it has not been fully explained why the United States requires full sovereignty over Greenland in order to achieve those security purposes, especially, again, in a vacuum. I'm not against it, but the cost being a pretty open break with NATO, a pretty open break with the Europeans, while the Russians are getting a lot more feisty on the global stage, while the Chinese are trying to fight their way out of a demographic box. Well, according to our sponsors over at Kalshi, the Kalshi markets suggest a 43% shot that Trump will buy at least part of Greenland before January 20th, 2029, and 29% of people believe that he will buy at least part of Greenland before 2027, right? Meaning sometime this year. So, it'll be interesting to see whether that materializes. But the question is, how much are we willing to alienate erstwhile allies in order to make an aggressive move with regard to Greenland? Because it turns out, for example, that right now there's an election in Denmark. That election in Denmark was actually trending toward the right-wing parties in Denmark until the president started messing around with all of this talk about Greenland. Now, the Social Democrats, the left, seems to be gaining some pretty significant ground in the opinion polling thanks to the president getting involved. The same thing, of course, happened in Canada when the president decided that he was going to launch an unsolicited trade war against the Canadians. Is this useful? Is this good? Well, I can say this. The movement of Canada away from Pierre Poilievre and toward Mark Carney has not been a boon to the United States. It's been a boon to China. But what's fascinating is listen to the language that Mark Carney, who was speaking at Davos, used with regard to the rules-based international order. He says, that didn't exist, therefore I should go make a deal with China. So he is taking the post-Wilsonian American view of the world, and he is twisting it toward an isolationist view of the United States that gives him the moral wherewithal to go cut deals with some of the worst people on earth. Here is Mark Carney.
1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. 4 decades.
And what does he do? He then called for, again, a movement away from the United States. He suggested that middle powers needed to come together to, quote, build something bigger, better, stronger, and more just. Quote, this is the task of the middle powers, the countries that have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and the most to gain from genuine cooperation. So he's talking there. It's amazing. Václav Havel was talking about the greengrocer issue with communism, right? Putting up the Workers of the World Unite sign was the building block of communist tyranny. He's talking about taking down the pro-America sign and putting up the "we're open for business with China" sign. That's really what he's talking about. Quote, Canada was amongst the first to hear the wake-up call, leading us to fundamentally shift our strategic posture, saying openly that he's attempting to break with the United States. Is that good for the United States? I'm not sure that it is. And then you have, of course, internationalists like Emmanuel Macron over in France. He also spoke over at Davos, where he suggested that he is going to stand up for rule of law, which, of course, is a joke. The French, of course, have a long history of siding with some of the worst regimes on planet Earth, but the goal is a reorientation away from an American-led world.
We have a place where rule of law and predictability is still the rule of the game. And my guess is that it is largely underpriced by the market. Having a place like Europe, which sometimes is too slow, for sure, and needs to be reformed, for sure, but which is predictable, loyal, and where you know that the rule of the game is just the rule of law, it's a good place. And here in the epicenter of this continent, we do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
Okay, that is absolute nonsense. I'm sorry. The Europeans prefer rule of law to brutality. I present to you large swaths of the history of the European continent, including most of the 20th century, as a bit of a counter-argument to that. As far as France prefers respect to bullies, again, France has been one of the more bullying powers over the course of the last several centuries, so that is a new one. But again, the goal here is to reorient away from America as the leader of the global movement and toward a sort of multipolar world in which the French are now going to pick up the baton. And so the president of the United States is trying to pull away from a New World Order vision of George H.W. Bush and his heirs that suggested that the U.S. should give up its autonomy to international institutions, which of course is right. The question is, what's going to supplant that? Is it America that is last in the world, or an America that is hemispherically restricted? Is it an America that is willing to allow Russia to do what it wants in Eastern Europe, or China to do what it wants in Taiwan, or allows Iran to do what it wants in the Middle East with the help of China and Russia? Or is it an America that continues to take its own policies seriously, continues to take its own citizens' interests seriously, which means being muscular in the world and pretending away, sort of the moment that we're in, the inflection point that we're in historically, I think would be a mistake. The president of the United States wants to initiate another trade war, again, this time over Greenland. But as the Wall Street Journal points out, this tariff threat is not like the others. In the past year, President Trump has used tariffs extensively to pursue trade and investment deals or address domestic complaints like illegal immigration and drugs. His threat to hit several European countries with tariffs of 10% rising to 25% if they oppose the U.S. annexation of Greenland is entirely different. It would be an unprecedented use of tariffs against an ally for a strategic as opposed to a domestic goal. This is the logical endpoint of Trump's core doctrine that the U.S. has economic size and influence give it leverage to achieve a variety of goals through tariffs, including some that previously required military force. President Trump using asymmetry and economic power in order to go after allies is sort of a shocking thing. And again, one of the fears that the Europeans have is that if Trump doesn't get Greenland, he could abandon Ukraine or NATO entirely, leaving Europe vulnerable to Russian aggression, which of course would make Russia exponentially stronger. I mean, if the idea is you got to get Greenland to prevent Russia from taking parts of the Arctic, then handing over Ukraine to the Russians seems like a strange sort of trade. And Greg Ip, writing for the Wall Street Journal, said, Europe might be reluctant to give up Greenland and risk a repeat of this trade war. For a while, Trump talked of making Canada the 51st state. That talk has ceased, but a successful acquisition of Greenland could whet his appetite anew. So it'll be really fascinating, again, to see where this goes. One place that it is going is the reorientation of a lot of countries away from the United States. And again, the stock market sank nearly 900 points on President Trump's newly declared wars with regard to tariffs on the European continent. The Dow Industrials lost 871 points. The dollar weakened, Treasury yields rose. And again, those stock declines gained momentum after President Trump doubled down on his desire to take over Greenland, according to the Wall Street Journal, firing off social media posts on his way to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. Asked how far he was willing to go to acquire Greenland, Trump told reporters at the White House, quote, "You'll find out." Well, the EU isn't waiting around to find out. EU President Ursula von der Leyen is teasing a big economic deal between India and the EU. The sort of multipolar reorientation is beginning.
And right after Davos, the next weekend, I will travel to India. There's still work to do, but we are on the cusp of a historic trade agreement. Indeed, some call it the mother of all deals. One that would create a market of 2 billion people, accounting for almost a quarter of global GDP. And crucially, that would provide a first mover advantage for Europe with one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic continents.
And again, the United States is right now in a trade war with India. So again, when you alienate a bunch of erstwhile allies, you do create the possibility of a vacuum, and chaos tends to fill that vacuum. Now, one of the people who's trying to take advantage of President Trump's heterodox views on foreign policy, again, we don't have a full picture. It'll be fascinating to see what the president has to say at Davos, is Gavin Newsom, who I sat down with last week. Gavin Newsom showed up at Davos because obviously he is running for president in 2028. And here he was ripping into the president, but more ripping into world leaders for the possibility of conceding to President Trump, which, again, is a slightly strange proposition. I mean, I think that it would probably be in the interests of not only the United States, but the globe for there to be more concessions from the Europeans to Trump, even if I largely disagree with Trump on things like what he's doing in Ukraine or with regard to Greenland, for that matter.
It's time to stand tall and strong.
Does that mean responding
time
with
to
tariffs?
stand united. You make that determination. I don't make that determination.
But when you say standing tall, what do you mean?
Just I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders. I mean, handing out crowns and this is pathetic. Nobel Prizes that are being given away. I mean, it's just pathetic. And I hope people understand how pathetic they look on the world stage. I mean, at least from an American perspective, it's embarrassing.
So what should Europe be doing?
You should decide, the Europeans should decide for themselves what to do. But one thing they can't do is what they've been doing. And they've been playing. This guy is playing folks for fools. And it's embarrassing.
Europeans think this is diplomacy and this will ultimately
this is
work.
diplomacy with Donald Trump? He's a T-Rex. You mate with him or he devours you.
Okay, I'm not even sure exactly what Gavin Newsom is arguing for the Europeans to do at this point, presumably to up their trade war with the United States, which would hurt American consumers and producers pretty dramatically. Newsom said in a statement, Trump's economic agenda betrays our nation. It is not America first, but Trump first, rewarding the favored, punishing the dissenters, and burdening the rest. At the World Economic Forum, I will forcefully confront these abuses and resolutely defend the principles to which California owes its economic strength: disciplined governance, world-leading universities, boundless innovation, and an open embrace of global cultures. I mean, he sounds like a libertarian, which is kind of astonishing considering his economic record in the state of California. He plans to blast the president's economic stewardship at Davos as, quote, an assault on the free market, and call Trump a crony capitalist pursuing personal enrichment. So he's going to attack Trump actually from the right on economics. Sort of a fascinating proposition. Meanwhile, on the immigration issue, President Trump continues to crack down. Federal prosecutors, according to the Associated Press, have now served grand jury subpoenas to Minnesota officials as part of an investigation into whether they obstructed or impeded law enforcement during a sweeping immigration operation in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. A person familiar with the matter said the subpoenas are going to seek records and were sent to the offices of Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, St. Paul Mayor Coley Herr, and officials in Ramsey and Hennepin counties, according to this person. The subpoenas are related to an investigation into whether Minnesota officials obstructed federal immigration enforcement through public statements they made. Tim Walz put out a statement responding to the subpoena. This, of course, is after he suggested that people get in the way, although he suggested peacefully, as though the word peacefully sort of obscured everything else that he was saying. Quote, Mr. President, Minnesota invites you to see our values in action. Come see how communities from all walks of life are working together and how the spirit of this state refuses to be defined by division or fear. I invite you to join me and others in our community to help restore calm and order and reaffirm that true public safety comes from shared purpose, trust, and respect. But let me be absolutely clear. The state of Minnesota will not be drawn into political theater. Okay, my dude, you are the director of this political theater. You're the producer, director, and writer of this political theater. They won't be drawn into political theater. Who started the political theater? Tim Walz was part and parcel of this thing. He was involved in every aspect of this political theater. He basically did the stage lights. This is ridiculous. He continued, my focus has always been protecting the rights of the people of this state, not protecting myself. Families are scared. Kids are afraid to go to school. Small businesses are hurting. A mother is dead, and people responsible have yet to be held accountable. That's where the energy of the federal government should be directed, toward restoring trust, accountability, and real law and order, not political retaliation. And then he says, I will not be intimidated into silence. Well, I mean, it's not about being intimidated into silence. It is about whether you're going to actually facilitate the obstruction of federal law. Now, President Trump, in the middle of this White House press conference, did something that I think was absolutely worthwhile. He held up the mugshots of some of the people who'd been arrested in Minnesota. It turns out that these are the kinds of people you would like for ICE to arrest and deport.
This is one state out of many. And these people are, let's see, yeah, these are all, so far, people that came from outside of the country. They were allowed in by Sleepy Joe Biden, Crooked Joe Biden, whichever you like. You can call him whatever you like. They're both right. He's sleepy and he's crooked. He was the worst president we've ever had. And we've had some bad ones, too. I can tell you, all you have to do is look at trade. You're not getting bored with this, right? I hope you don't. But these are people that you have to see. Strong-arm rape, aggravated assault with a weapon, and many other crimes.
Again, he's not wrong about this, and more of this would be good from just a PR level. One of the things I talked about earlier this week is you want the optics with regard to illegal immigration to be focused on the thing that policing illegal immigration is really about, going after criminal illegal immigrants. Well, the president also had some comments about Somali Americans and the vast swath of Somalis who've been allowed into Minnesota. Some rather, shall we say, colorful remarks from the president here.
Halted all refugee admissions to the United States, including from Somalia, which is a terrible, terrible place, and other dangerous places. And we also stopped the pirates because they get the same treatment as the drug boats. So in Somalia, the Somalians, you know what they're good at? That's about the only thing they're good at is they're good at pirating ships at sea, big ships.
Well, somebody saw Captain Phillips. So there we are. The president, at the same time, suggested Hispanics are some of the best people we have. So he's apparently trying, I think, probably to buy back some of the low numbers he has with Hispanic Americans, possibly based on the ICE raids.
Then they say, oh, we discriminate against. I love Hispanic. They are unbelievable, entrepreneurial. They have everything. I did great. I did the highest. Nobody ever got numbers like I got from the standpoint of being a Republican. But even if you look at Texas, I won the entire border along Texas, between Texas and Mexico. It never happened before. Nobody's ever done that before. I did it. As a Republican, I did it. I love the Hispanic. And they accuse us of all sorts of things. 60% of the people we're talking about, they're the best people we have, and they're Hispanic. The Border Patrol is largely Hispanic. ICE is largely Hispanic. They're unbelievable people.
Okay, so, again, the president, when it comes to illegal immigration, he is counting on the left to make a large-scale mistake. And he is right about this because, again, the more he focuses in on going after criminal illegal immigrants or fraud, the better he will be doing. Greg Bovino is the CBP commander at large, touting Minnesota's arrest record.
Let's don't quit there. Let's keep on there. We've got Annabelle Gomez, a illegal alien from Honduras, previously arrested for criminal sexual conduct and domestic assault. Other convictions include disorderly conduct and driving under the influence of liquor. Walking the streets as of yesterday. These are just three that I decided to print out. There's a whole stack of them. These are the kinds of individuals this operation focuses on. Individuals who escalate situations and endanger others. Again, our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, and Ma and Pa America. This is exactly why interior enforcement exists, to remove dangerous criminals from our communities.
Well, the left, for its part, is going too far. So again, I warned about this on Monday. I suggested that ugly images of ICE in the middle of raids would not be great for the administration, but that the left could go too far, and they waited precisely 0 seconds before going too far. Obviously, we've been talking over the course of the past several days about this church invasion in Minneapolis, this takeover of a church by people protesting ICE. Well, one of those protesters is a person named William Kelly, who apparently is basically a professional protester. He just shows up at these things for fun. And here he was talking about his supposed heroism for invading a church.
So, Pam Bondi, you want to come and arrest me? You want to come and give me charges? So be it. And for all the people giving me death threats, threatening my life, kill me. Go ahead, kill me. Because you know what? As Fred Hampton said, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution.
Okay, well, I'm sure that Americans are going to love that. In other news, we now find that many of the protests across the country, ranging from the Free Palestine protests to the ICE protests, have been organized by a group called the People's Forum, a Chinese Communist Party-funded organization behind an enormous amount of protest activity in New York City. According to Jason Smith, who's the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, he's now demanding records from that group, the People's Forum, a New York-based 501c3 organization, following mounting evidence that shows the organization has acted as a foreign agent for the CCP and has received millions of dollars in funding from a known CCP ally named Neville Roy Singham while enjoying the benefits of U.S. tax-exempt status. So you have allegedly foreign-funded protesting, you have takeovers of churches, and, of course, you have politicians who are making the dumbest argument possible, which is that law enforcement should apparently unilaterally disband. Zoran Mamdani, who, remember, is now the new face of the Democratic Party. This is according to Democrats, because he said the word affordability over and over and over and really doesn't like Jews very much. Here is Zoran Mamdani on The View making the argument that ICE should be full-scale abolished.
I am in support of abolishing ICE, and I'll tell you why. Because what we see is an entity that has no interest in fulfilling its stated reason to exist. We're seeing a government agency that is supposed to be enforcing some kind of immigration law, but instead what it's doing is terrorizing people, no matter their immigration status, no matter the facts of the law, no matter the facts of the case. And I'm tired of waking up every day and seeing a new image of someone being dragged out of a car, dragged out of their home, dragged out of their life. What we need to see is humanity. And there is a way to care about immigration in this city and in this country with a sense of humanity. What we're seeing from ICE is not it, and we have not seen that from them in a long, long time.
In a long time? Okay, fine. So we want to abolish ICE. This is going to go about as well as abolish the police went. There's a reason, again, that Governor Newsom in California was telling me that he opposes Zoran Mamdani and other Democrats claiming that ICE should be abolished. But apparently, this is going to be another one of these nostrums that idiot Democrats are going to have to repeat over and over. Newly elected New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill made a similar argument yesterday. She suggested that President Trump is keeping standing armies among us in times of peace. No, he's not. They're a domestic law enforcement agency. They are doing law enforcement. That's literally in their mandate. It's what they are designed to do.
He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. And this election proved that the people of New Jersey recognize the parallels. That we see a president illegally usurping power, unconstitutionally enacting a tariff regime to make billions for himself and his family.
Again, if this is the direction Democrats want to go, good luck to them. And as for prosecution of Minnesota officials, honestly, we'll see where the investigation goes. I mean, you have the Minnesota police chief, a man named Mark Bruley, now claiming that officers who are people of color in the force feel victimized by ICE. Like, officers in the police are afraid of ICE if they're people of color. Man, good luck with this. I can't believe Democrats are going to get on this train again. It's pretty astonishing.
Recently, as the last 2 weeks, we, as law enforcement community, have been receiving endless complaints about civil rights violations in our streets from U.S. citizens. What we're hearing is they're being stopped in traffic stops or on the street with no cause and being forced to demand paperwork to determine if they are here legally. Every one of these individuals is a person of color who has had this happen to them.
So, again, will be fascinating to see how this works out for Democrats if they are activating local law enforcement now to oppose the agenda of ICE. Truly, man, Democrats seem capable of pulling pretty much any defeat from the jaws of what could be an electoral victory in 2026. Well, here at the Daily Wire, we are hosting a documentary. It premiered back in October. It's really, really important. It's called The 1916 Project, all about the origins of Planned Parenthood, which, of course, was born in 1916. The host of the 1916 Project is Seth Gruber, a leading voice in the pro-life movement who's spoken more than 300 times to over 500,000 people. He's also the host of the Seth Gruber Show. Seth, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.
So for folks who are unaware of the 1916 Project, what is it? Why is it important for people to take a look at it?
Yeah, thank you, brother. I think one of my favorite lines about history, which is one of the reasons I've enjoyed your show, is just what you learn when you actually study your history, is from Hilaire Belloc. He was Chesterton's best friend. And he said, to comprehend the history of a thing is to unlock the mysteries of its present. And more to discover the profundities of its future. So fancy language for we actually don't study history to like nitpick over what happened then. We study to understand what's happening now and kind of be able to predict and prophesy where these ideas go if they're not stopped. And so having spoken to conferences, churches all around the country, I found that even like rock-ribbed warrior, culture warriors, Christians, had no idea about the sordid history of Planned Parenthood beyond like, oh, what it was like eugenics, right? Or didn't she do the Negro Project? And that's about it. And the history of it is so disturbing. It was hard for me to finish writing the book and making the movie, which is, it's a book as well, which people can get anywhere. And so we kind of played on the 1619 Project as well, Ben, which was just kind of a God thing that the numbers switched. And that was the first Planned Parenthood clinic because it was actually the 1619 Project revolutionaries. What was that? Like end of 2019, fall of 2019, a few months before George Floyd. And then everything's racist. Any corporation that's based on or had a relationship with racism 100 years ago is racist and has to be burnt down. And it's stranger than fiction, Ben. The 1619 Project revolutionaries and BLM, they all went after Planned Parenthood in the summer of 2020. And they said, hey, your founders are racist. And then the director of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, Karen Seltzer, the most hilarious liberal white woman name that you could possibly come up with, comes out and says, we're done making excuses for our founder and the damage she did to communities of color. They stopped giving out the Margaret Sanger Award. They took her name off the Sanger mega Planned Parenthood Manhattan Health Clinic, which just shut down, by the way. And then New York City took off the sign called the Margaret Sanger Square. So in other words, yeah, she was super racist and really bad. Now nothing to see here, move along. And so it was actually 1619 Project academics and revolutionaries that kind of helped expose Planned Parenthood finally dissing themselves from their founder. So we opened up the book and the film, Ben, by saying, so what? Wait. You defended her for 100 years. And now out of nowhere, you canceled her because the revolution always eats its own. Who was she really? And what's the seed that has yielded this bitter harvest? And we started with her first clinic in 1916. So that's why we made it. And we found that that's been the most powerful way to mobilize people who are like, oh yeah, abortion's bad, to go do something about it, is when they see all the connections with the pedophilia movement, the eugenics movement, even the KKK and the Nazis. That's not hyperbole. That's not a Republican talking point that you and I say, Ben. You know the history. The connections will blow your mind.
So, for folks who are unfamiliar with any of it, and I don't want to give away what's in the documentary because everybody should go to Daily Wire Plus and take a look at it. But what is one of the most shocking things that people are going to find out about in the 1916 Project?
Yeah, there's a lot of like jaw dropping, like you need to like pause the film because you want to throw things at your TV. So because there's so many, we'll give you maybe one of the most shocking ones that I found in my research. And this was difficult to even find. The book's actually behind me here that has that bombshell. It was very difficult to find. You can't really find it anywhere else, but it's all footnoted. The founding board member of Planned Parenthood, which actually for people if we want to know, it was actually established in 1921 as an organization called the American Birth Control League, but her first clinic was in 1916 under Sanger. And so his name's Lothrop Stoddard. And we actually have the screenshots and the scans of original documents showing the first board of directors when the American Birth Control League was founded. Lothrop Stoddard, who sat on the board, Ben, for years, was none other than the, quote, exalted cyclops of the Massachusetts KKK chapter. And he wrote a couple books, one called The Revolt Against Civilization, The Menace of the Underman, another one called The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. But his Menace of the Underman, and I have the German translation back here. I bought it from Germany, only one I could find for sale online. I'm kind of a nerd with old books. And the German party, the Nazi party, paid for the German translation of Lothrop Stoddard's book into German. And when they translated Menace of the Underman, they translated it Untermenschen. Which, so some of my research is either the first time or one of the first times the Nazis begin to use that phrase, Untermenschen. Lothrop Stoddard's books were assigned in German classrooms and reading schools during Hitler's reign. They loved him so much, Ben, they invited him to the Third Reich in 1939. He wrote a book about it called Into the Darkness, Nazi Germany Today, published in 1940, right when he came back. And he describes meeting with Himmler, Fritz Sauckel, Robert Ley, in a brief meeting with Hitler himself. To my knowledge, you might be the one to correct me on this. To my knowledge, I think Lothrop Stoddard's, Margaret Sanger's founding Planned Parenthood board member, is the only American to have had a face-to-face, private room, one-on-one meeting with Hitler after he rose to power, the founding board member of Planned Parenthood. So that's one of the most shocking ones, and you can't. It's historically verifiable.
Pretty shocking stuff, obviously. Well, I also wanted to point out, Seth, that obviously it's a big week for the pro-life movement. The Life or Death Conference is being hosted by you this Thursday. You can go check it out at lifeordeathcon.com. It features our own Megan Basham. What can people expect there?
Yeah, thank you. We're really trying to step up in a big way with the overturning of Roe, which is right when I launched the White Rose Resistance, the ministry that made this film, because, it goes back to the states. And now there's this whole conversation about how do we end abortion? And we believe that this shocking, crazy thing, that the same laws that apply to infants that protect them from being murdered should be applied to unborn babies. No one's out for mothers. No one's criminalizing women. We want to criminalize abortion because that's what good laws do. They actually protect the innocent. And unfortunately, there's a lot of pro-life groups, we won't get into all that, who disagree with that. So we're really trying to mobilize people to see the battle lines and to contend for life in their state. And so we've got incredible speakers, including, like you said, Megan Basham and others. So that'll be the day before the March for Life in Washington, D.C. at Union Station in the nation's capital.
And of course, the March for Life is always one of the biggest things happening in Washington, D.C., and it's always the thing the media love to ignore every single year. So make sure you check that out as well. Seth, thanks so much for the time. Everybody should go check out your documentary, The 1916 Project, over at Daily Wire Plus.
Thank you, Ben.
Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. We'll get to the Supreme Court, where apparently Ketanji Brown Jackson is, again, not doing a particularly good job. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you are not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.